Welcome back to the Music Teachers in International Schools podcast. I'm your host, Chris Kulmer, and this podcast is all about exploring the unique world of international schooling and music education with the goal of building a stronger and more connected community of music teachers working in the world's international schools. I hope you're all doing okay and enjoying getting stuck into new projects and events and maybe even new approaches. At MTIAS, we have recently launched our World Music Pedagogy course, which in itself is a course that helps us to critique the entire concept of world music through a process of deconstruction and relearning using the 5 dimensions. And our course director, Dr. Jennifer Walden, is amazing and will once again be taking us through the 16-hour live online course, which includes interaction with culture bearers from around the world, plus a chance to expand our network and meet like-minded teachers living and working around the world. So head over to mtiis.co and click on the Professional Learning tab to find out more. Okay, on to today's episode. That was a long ramble from me. One of my favorite things about this podcast is exploring the life and world of someone working in a unique context. And today's guest is none other than Kristel Tretter. And Kristel is a Canadian national living and working in the city of Kota Kinabalu, more commonly known as KK. KK sits under the constant watch of Mount Kinabalu, which is the 3rd highest peak of an island on Earth, according to Wikipedia, and the 20th most prominent mountain in the world by topographic prominence. I feel like this is going to be a geography podcast. It's a cool looking craggy mountain. I remember climbing it and it was amazing. But KK is also quite a cool city that has evolved a lot since I first visited in 2013. So of course, this podcast is not about mountains or geography, but about music education. But we'll try and cover plenty of territory today. That should make for a fun conversation. So let's get into it. Kristel, it's so nice to see you and thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So let's start off with this Kota Kinabalu thing. Where is Kota Kinabalu and what's it like to live there?
Kota Kinabalu is the capital of the state of Sabah. Sabah is a state within Malaysia as a country. However, most people think of Malaysia, we think of the peninsular part, which is between Thailand and Singapore. However, Sabah is actually in East Malaysia on the island of Borneo. So it's a little bit less commonly visited, a little bit more rustic, but it's just a nice place in the Southeast Asia, tropical island, and good vibe.
Yeah, cool. How long have you been there again?
2 years now. This is starting my 3rd year.
So what led you to apply for a job and move to Kota Kinabalu and Kinabalu International School, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. So many things. I've lived in Southeast Asia for a while, so I knew about Kota Kinabalu. I had heard of it. I had no idea there even was an international school here. I had even flown to KK and traveled a bit of Sabah when I lived in Singapore. But, so just kind of backstory a bit. I worked in Singapore for several years. I really enjoyed it, but there's that point where you're either there for the rest of your life or you move on to travel and see the world. So I wanted to see the world and explore. So, then I moved to Thailand for a little while, and then Mozambique for a little while, and then Japan for a little while. And of course, I was kind of looking for that place to go. And, COVID hit in there and ended up with this job posting, just looking, and Kinabalu International School. And I'm like, wait, what? I'm also an avid scuba diver. And I already knew the island also from that point of view, because it had been on my bucket list to scuba dive in Sipadan, which, if you don't know, is rated as one of the top dive sites in the world. And so as a scuba diver, I was like, ooh, I know exactly where this is. This sounds really interesting. I've been to Malaysia and, the people are friendly. I knew, although English isn't the primary language, Bahasa Melayu isn't a difficult one to learn, and many people do speak English, so it's not that difficult to get by. It's a very laid-back lifestyle, which some might say is actually to the detriment. They're frustrated with the lack of maybe organization. But for me, it's totally my vibe. It's laid back, relaxed. Nothing is overly stressful. Your life is not going to be constantly deciding things. It's got a good kind of chill part to it. So nothing happens super quickly, but if you can deal with that, it's a great place. So I think that really drove me to want to live in this part of the world.
Nice. A couple of follow-up questions I have to ask. So, how many times have you dived Sipadan now?
A lot. I was very lucky because I arrived here in 2021. And as you know, this is sort of still in the middle of COVID and things that are happening. Even that was a nightmare. So actually, we were teaching online for the first month because our visas hadn't been processed because immigration had been shut down. So, and then quarantine in KL, etc. Anyway, we get here and there's no interstate travel allowed. Luckily, Sipadan is in the state that I live. So right away, there were these massive discounts offered to anyone who could basically get there. So I think it's been about 5 times, and I'm already planning a trip in October.
That is cool. And I'm just imagining people listening to this going, Sipadan, and like typing away, looking for it. Sipadan, Sipadan Island. Definitely have a look because just the photos of it is beautiful and it will make you want to either start diving or go there and dive. So well done on so many times in 2 years. And the second follow-up I wanted to ask was Bahasa. You mentioned maybe it's a language that's kind of easier to pick up. And we can go into why that might be, but how is your Bahasa? Have you managed to pick up a bit?
I've picked up a bit. I'm actually quite good at vocabulary now. I did take some time before finding a tutor, hoping that I would pick it up naturally. And then to be honest, I wasn't practicing it. So by getting a tutor, I was hopefully more focused on it. But yeah, the first sort of 6 months, all it was heavy vocabulary. So I know things like kiri and kanan, which is my left and my right? Or to count, satu, dua, tiga. I can count numbers. And I know lots of vocabulary, but putting it together in sentences, I'm still pretty terrible. And that's my next goal, obviously. But yeah, Bahasa itself actually means language. So it's the language of Malaya, right?
Yes.
So, but yeah, it's not as tonal as some Asian languages are. So I don't have to worry too much, trying to learn Mandarin or Japanese when I was in Japan, not as easy. Also, it's a nice Roman letters, so easy to read as English, and you can phonetically figure it out. Oddly, what makes it easier is the lack of grammar rules. That being said, coming from Canada, I learned French, and coming from a German family, I learned German, and the lack of phonetics, or not phonetics, grammar is almost throwing me for a loop. I don't know what to do when I don't know what gender or plural or whatever to put it in, and you don't have to. So it's oddly easy, but I'm confusing myself probably more.
That's super interesting. Really cool. I wonder if others in the community might resonate. For those who have, worked in Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, that all share that sort of commonality of Bahasa Melayu, Bahasa Indonesia. Very interesting. We could probably talk a lot about language, especially with all the countries you've lived in. But I wanted to touch on, I guess you were talking about KK, Kota Kinabalu, and, the easy life kind of thing that you've come across in some ways. What about challenges? Like maybe being in an area that's not a giant city, a mega city, like Singapore, for example. Have you faced any major challenges living in KK?
Well, I mean, obviously coming from sort of the other side of the world, there are certain things you're used to growing up because things don't function maybe quickly. Patience is a virtue. Yes. Most definitely. Patience is key. Visa renewals, as I mentioned, just getting in the country, getting our visas was quite the process. And I'm now in the midst, of course, my passport I don't have because it's being sent for its new visa. Passport stamps, which you don't think, but not all countries stamp your passport, right? Here, Sabah is treated like they think of themselves as their own country. And I'm not going to get into the political scope of that because there's much to it. But basically, if I go to KL, I stamp out of Sabah and I fly to KL and I stamp into Kuala Lumpur, and so that's kind of a bit of the nightmare. I have 4 years left on my passport, but I have to renew it because it's full.
You've run
Every
out of
time I go
pages.
somewhere, it stamps the password. So it's little things of this nature, you know. You can't purchase things on the spot. So everything has to be shipped in or ordered. There's shopping malls. You can definitely get a pair of shoes if you need it. They just opened up a Marks and Spencer's. It's not like we're in the middle of nowhere. But that being said, especially from a music point of view, and I haven't even gotten to, just living, let alone school, like I bought a digital piano for my condo and I had to have it shipped from Kuala Lumpur. There are music shops here you can get as well, but everything comes with an extra premium price. So you'd think, oh, more low key, probably lower cost of living, but oddly, things cost a lot more.
Yeah.
Anytime, we're looking into buying a piano for the school, this is a 1 to 3 month shipping time. Like nothing happens quickly.
Yeah. And somewhere between 1 and 3 months or 6.
Yeah. Yeah. So, just sourcing school supplies, books. I'm ordering from like Amazon UK or things like that because we don't have Amazon in Malaysia. So it's things that provide challenges, but these are challenges I can deal with. Like, I can live without those if I have to. And we have the internet, which works when it's not raining.
Oh, okay. Right. Yeah. That could be a challenge.
That's a whole other ballgame.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to know a bit more about the Canadian part of this whole conversation, because that was in the intro. You've mentioned as well, you've sort of come from a Canadian background, but moved around a lot. So I'd be really interested in understanding a bit more, and I hope the rest of the community is too, but understanding a bit of a difference maybe, or the differences between teaching the Canadian curriculum. So let's get into music curriculum stuff, to now teaching an internationalized English national curriculum. That's how you and I kind of met. We were chatting about curriculum, and I was like, we need to talk on a podcast. So take us down that kind of journey. What's it been like maybe transitioning from Canadian curriculum to English national curriculum, international?
Yeah, so I'm originally from the province of Ontario, so we do have provincial curricula in Canada. That being said, there is a lot of commonality between the provinces. So I don't think it would be that difficult to transition to a different province. There is a nationalistic sort of thinking and approach. I was also very lucky because my first school in Canada, I taught for 4 years just north of Toronto. It was actually an IB school also. I say also, the students would actually graduate with their IB diploma and their Ontario secondary school diploma. So we taught both coinciding with each other, which has its challenges in itself, but it immediately, luckily, the Canadian and the IB tend to actually lend themselves quite well.
Can I just jump in there? Were they doing 2 curricula at the same time and had to cover slightly different content, like double classes, or did you have to mash it together?
You had to mash it together.
Fun.
We literally had double the paperwork. There was our Ontario curriculum unit plans, and then there was our MYP or DP unit plans, but we're literally teaching them at the same time. So luckily, again, things lended themselves very well. The Ontario curriculum does cross over, especially at the MYP level. Both are very skill-based, and you could heavily rely on the Ontario parts that were more specific curriculum. How, key signatures, or do they have to know how much reading music? It was a little more specific, whereas the MYP is more of a framework, right? It doesn't specify. And then when you get into the diploma, again, I find it's very skill-based. So they might dictate that you have to compare and contrast 2 different genres of music in grade 11. Well, the IB does that with the I know the IB has changed, by the way. This is the old IB diploma, where you had to basically compare 2 different genres to do an investigation project. So, at the end of the day, it was actually not that difficult to tick off both at the same time. There were moments, yes, you still had to cover something that wasn't in the other, but it was doable. But then, moving abroad, luckily actually, my first school was a local Singapore Ministry of Education school. So I was actually hired by the ministry. I knew nothing about international schools. This was not something I thought of. I was actually looking for a job in Canada. And on my Canadian job site, popped up, teach in Singapore. And I'm like, where's Singapore? I didn't know where it was, as I think is very common of a lot of Canadians. Anyway, ended up though switching into international school, and I was in an IB school. So my training worked well, carried on. Now coming into sort of, this is my first British school. And that's been a bit of a change. But I've been quite, I've now taught the Singapore system, the IB system, the Canadian system. In Japan, I taught at an American school. I feel pretty like I can adapt to most things, but most British schools want that background of a British background. I was very, very lucky, I feel, to get this job because it was just in an ideal location. And to be honest, I really do like the vibe at my school. It's a really great feel at the school community. The students are great. The other colleagues I teach with are great. So coming in, we have this British curriculum, and I think the biggest difference is the sort of approach to learning, approach to education, philosophy of education. I've mentioned so far that there was such a skill-based focus, and that it's more about, can you analyze music as opposed to analyze this piece of music, right? I think so coming into the IGCSE and A level was a big step. Now, I mean, the IB diploma had set scores as well and things, but that was one of the biggest adjustments I had to make. I don't get to choose as much what is being done and what is being put together. I feel like the biggest difference is process versus product. In one scenario, mostly in the Canadian system, they very much value the process. You might have an assessment that is just on the plan and vision for your composition, and then an assessment on the reflection on how it went, the challenges you faced. And the actual composition itself, it counts, but it's probably not worth as much as the other two. Whereas in the more Cambridge style curriculum, nobody really worries. I mean, the A level does bring in a written report of sorts, but otherwise it's really about the product. What is the actual composition? Is it the most effective composition they could have written? So I think that's one of the big differences. Standardized exams. That was a big shock to me leaving Canada. We don't have them. So I know IB does. We don't have them. I'd never even, I've heard of the SATs in the US. Okay. We don't have standardized exams. I set my own exam for my class. So I was just like, wait, all the students have to sit and write the same paper taught by like hundreds of different teachers? I was baffled. I was truly baffled. I'm like, what?
So in Canada then, you make your own exam, set it, mark it, and then submit it to the provincial board or something like that. Is there any kind of moderation, or it's just in school, done?
It's in school and done. However, the moderation happens through school visits, right? So we are all checks and balances. They do come and inspect, and they make sure all your plans are up to par and that you're teaching at the similar rigorous level or whichever that is expected, that your assessments are meeting what they would consider an appropriate standard. If you're not, they give you feedback. And if you're in a public state school, you're going to follow the feedback. You're just going to implement it, and that's going to happen. If you're in a private school, as I was, they can take away your accreditation. And one school in our city actually did. And it was just jaw-dropping because it was the first time it happened. And they decided to do what we were doing, the local curriculum in the IB. They decided to ignore the local curriculum and just teach the IB. And Ontario came along and said, okay, you can't offer the Ontario Secondary School Diploma anymore. And their enrollment dropped very quickly, actually. Wow. So there's definitely a checks and balances to make sure, but it's done with the student in mind. I think that's what it comes down to. It's what is going to help that child learn, not make sure all their grades match.
Got ya.
It was such a different philosophy leaving Canada into these more general systems, and then even more so into the British system.
Right. So there's lots of ways we could go with this, but I'll try this angle. So you've had this background in Canada, and then you've come into these more rigorous, more sort of strict, I guess, standardized approaches of, I guess, both the IB, which, as we've said, has changed a little bit maybe at DP, but definitely in the English nationalized curriculum, internationalized curriculum. Have you been able to integrate some of that approach from Canada regardless, like even within the strictness of these curricula, or has it sort of changed a lot of what you've had to do?
Yes and no. I think over the years I have. Again, a lot of this is considered, modern 21st century education, differentiating for students, right? So, creating a different type of project. If a student struggles with writing, let them present their findings instead, right? Coming up with alternative ways to still have them meet the same standard, showcase that they understand at the same level, but in a way that works for them. So that's something I probably did when I was a kid, like this isn't really a new concept in Canada because that is really we've been student centered for quite a long time. But that being said, most schools, I feel, most international schools are that way. We talk about differentiate. That word came up in our staff meeting on Monday already as we're discussing AI and other things and the use of that for differentiation or things like that. But at the end of the day, they still have to submit the same composition, and they still have, can they choose the music? There's some differentiation in their performance. There's differentiation. That's easy. I feel they can choose a style that suits them, things like that. But I do feel like that I find that difficult. And one of the difficulties is avoiding teaching to the test. And so I feel like I'm still trying to find that balance. I've come in, I need to make sure they're successful on the listening paper. How do I do that without just teaching to the test? Because I haven't had to do it quite like that before. So it's me finding a balance. I do think there is a balance to be had. I think I'm on my way. I'm definitely incorporating different ways to make it exciting and engaging and not, here's a bunch of test questions, let's try them. That being said, it's hard to not want to do some of that so they feel prepared too.
Yes. Wow, I wonder if others in the community would resonate with some of these ideas. And we won't go too specific here because, we don't want to paint the same picture for everyone or, come across too strong about this idea, maybe, because there's other ways of looking at this. But I really like this idea. And I love in the podcast where we can reflect on influences from other systems that could really maybe be a good thing for international schooling, where we've possibly got the ability to try other things. And so I really like some of these influences coming through from what you had in Canada. And I think there's a lot more to this discussion that we could maybe have in the wider MTIS community about exams, especially maybe some of these standardized exams and what they're doing for our students and maybe what they're not doing for our students. So all that to say, thanks for kind of taking us there on your journey and giving us a picture of what it's been like for you to adopt this new approach. Let's take a bit of a left turn because I'd love to know a bit more about what you're doing in your school, in the music department. And maybe you can do that by telling us what you're looking forward to most about the academic year ahead. We're right at the beginning. What's ahead for you? What's it going to look like? What are you excited about?
I mean, I guess the one thing I like about being at KIS in Kinabalu is there is a different vibe, and that does infiltrate into our school. So although we're, a Cambridge school and we teach sort of a mostly English national curriculum and things like that, we're very much encouraged to do lots of different variety of things.
Nice.
I have such a supportive admin. So they love that music is flourishing at the school. So we are looking forward to an arts week coming up. So in the past, it's just been a single day. We're planning a whole week this year. It's coming up at the end of October. And, we're having guest performers come in, which is, by the way, not easy to find in Kota Kinabalu.
Oh, I'd love to know more about that. Who are you getting in?
I'm in the plans right now, but yeah, I do have, luckily, it's amazing who you meet and who is connected to who. So actually, one of our teachers, he's a science teacher, his wife happens to have been one of the most famous Chinese opera singers. like
Wow.
viral videos, like epic stage. She's famous in China. Like absolutely amazing. I've heard her. She's beautiful. It just so happens there's a really great flautist who, studied, well, he's actually American, but he's Sabahan American. So he's kind of come back to Sabah, but he was born and raised in New York. And just, it's amazing who lives here. I'm really impressed with the sort of people who I run into and make acquaintance with. And I'm hoping to maybe even reach out to some of the other music teachers in the area. So I'm connected with several of them, and maybe they might be part of it. So it's starting there. We got to start somewhere, and then maybe it'll build or grow. We'll see if I can make more connections as I stay here longer, but that's one of the big things. When I came in, I made changes to the Key Stage 3 program so that I could help prepare students for the IGCSE. And so this year will be the first year those students will have now been through all 3 years, and I'm kind of preparing that. And I want to see kind of the results of that. What tweaks will I make? So I'm really excited for that to come up. And finally, we also have a new principal at our school this year. And he's got just quite an exciting vision for the school and just a fresh perspective. So I think there's a lot to look forward to with the coming year at KIS.
So nice. Would you be okay to tell us maybe one thing you've done at Key Stage 3 that you're excited about, like something in the curriculum you've introduced over the last few years?
I mean, I don't know if I introduced it, to be honest, because it could have been there before, but it hadn't been there, at least in, I would say, the foreseeable past. Of course, COVID prevented a lot of things, right? So one of the things we've done is much more like practical performance. So often music programs are music appreciation, maybe a little bit, but we're trying to do instruments over 2 years. So actually, like year 6 to year 7, we're doing piano and keyboard. And so it's not just 1 year. And I do that also because that's a nice little transition into secondary. They start in primary, transition into secondary. And then years 8 and 9, they're working on guitar. And the nice thing with that one, sort of, they start composing in the second year of each of those programs. So they learn to perform, and they might write a little melody in their beginning stages. But when they get to the second year, they then put together a much more robust composition, and they start using some music software. Then with the guitar, they get into some songwriting in year 9 and really getting together. All of a sudden, they now understand chord progressions, they're understanding cadences just from putting together their own pop song and things like that. So I want to see this is going to be the first year I can really do the songwriting component, which I've done before, but maybe not with this particular group and the environment we have, but I'm quite excited for it.
I like the idea of the keyboard across 6 and 7 for the transition. That works really well. And is that a part of being in a smaller school where you're really working closely with primary? I don't think we covered that. Are you working in primary as well, or is the
initial position prior to me arriving, the teacher taught years 2 to 11.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Yeah. And so the position was actually advertised as a whole school music position, which made me very nervous because I've never taught primary before. And I told them that. I was very honest in my interview. But of course, they wanted to add A levels, and they haven't had a teacher that could teach A levels, I guess, in the past, or something of that. They haven't had a chance to. So they did say, until we have the A levels, you might still be teaching some primary. And I'll give it a go. Like, I might as well try it. It could be a lot of fun. And it's been quite a lot of fun. So I started 2 years ago teaching years 4 to 12. And that's because, of course, they didn't expect to get an A-level student right away. So I was supposed to teach, I said, year 2 to 11, but then right away, I got an A-level student. So it was then year 4 to 12, which was kind of pushing the limits, but because of COVID, they're trying to, which I understood. Like, sometimes there's just some things you just have to, okay, I was a very busy timetable. Luckily, the year after, I didn't get any new A levels. So that student moved to year 13, no year 12s, but moved up to year 5. Now I'm year 6 to 12 again. Next year, I already know one of my year 11s, and possibly I'm hoping more of them will be taking A level. So next year I will not have any primary anymore because I will be a very, very busy secondary music teacher.
That's really cool. That's a nice transition over the years. I like it. And yeah, great to be able to move between 6 and 7.
Yeah, I think it's been a little bit of a professional development, really. I've never taught primary before. I get a better sense of where they're coming from.
Yes.
I don't terribly want to do it permanently, but it was actually a really nice way to kind of build my background also.
I would love to ask you the question I really like to ask lots of people because I find it has plenty of nuance in it. What do you think, Kristel, makes a good international school music teacher?
I mean, I think there's a lot of advice that could come in here. I think the first is really getting to know your students, getting to know who's in your class. Where do they come from? Right? Where, and I don't think it has to happen through a go around the room and tell me where you're from scenario. I feel like that's a little bit contrived to a certain extent. But just as you get to know your students, I find out that, if some of them speak Korean, one day I'll count the music in Korean. I'll have them teach me how to count to 4 in Korean. And then, and they just love that you're in tune with what's going on. And especially at Key Stage 3 and even in primary, and not just that they love it, but it really does help you connect with the students. And then I think having diverse examples. So music, we're often showing videos. If I'm teaching instruments of the orchestra and showing video of a violinist, of a saxophone player, that they're not all just European in background. This is a student of diverse background and mostly Asian in my school. Why not have people that they can relate to? Also, showing what the world can do too. So I think we need to not limit only to what we have in our classroom, but what is the world capable of, so that they're not making judgments or assumptions on who can be a violinist or who can be a saxophonist. So I think there's so much more to music than just the subject, but we are building young, successful people. So I think also addressing diverse taste in music. So often you get a student, I shouldn't say often, but on occasion, if you don't set it up well, you could get a student make fun of another student for liking a certain kind of music, but actually allowing students to have different tastes in music. Even if I play the silly song and I go, well, this is my favorite, they're like, oh. But, allowing them to choose too. If I just play the stuff I think is good, and should I play good music? Yes. But right now in year 7, they're doing analyzing music. So they have to write about the melody, for example. Does it move in steps or leaps? Is it ascending or descending? These sort of things. And for their homework, I'm like, you pick your own song. Pick the song you want to do, whatever. And then we take up the homework and I'll play their songs in class and they love it. They can associate with it. It's real to them. So I think a good international teacher creates that environment where students are part of the classroom. They have a contribution to it. I feel like a good international music teacher, I think there's all international teachers really, need to ask more questions and make less statements.
Ooh, I like that.
Like ask the student what they think as opposed to just telling them what I think, right? Allowing them to see it from different points of view. A student answers and I could say, yes, that's right. Or I can say, do you agree with him or her? Did they go through the process? Not assuming anything about their capabilities, right? We don't know unless we support them and let them grow. So I think that sometimes the quiet students can wow us and we don't realize it. Or sometimes that weak student, given the right environment and comfort level, will step up and really thrive. So I think that's a key factor also.
Lots of great ideas there. Really nice. I liked the idea of diverse music in the classroom. And this one sort of come up before, but yeah, the idea of maybe a class playlist that we all contribute to and we get to share our own ideas. And the way you framed that was really nice. I sort of pictured myself in your classroom just going, oh, that would be cool. Yeah. Really getting those influences from everyone. Thanks for taking us on that little journey. I'm going to start wrapping things up, I think. And I've really enjoyed this. I think the audience will too, because again, as with the Sipadan conversation earlier with diving, I can imagine people typing, Kota Kinabalu, where is this? I want to go there. If people want to reach out and learn more about where you are, what you're doing, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
I mean, I guess they could email me. I think it's probably the best.
This is that point where you're like, on my social media channels. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I do have social media, but I don't check it very often, to be honest. Yeah.
Great. Well, we'll put if you're comfortable with it, we'll put some contact details somewhere in case people have a question or two for you. Did you have anything else you want to share? Any other thoughts, ideas before we finish up?
It's been great to kind of share these ideas in, such a bit of a small part of the world that I'm in, but it's home for me. So I like it.
We'll leave it there. Thanks so much, Kristel, and I look forward to catching up with you one day somewhere around the world.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Music Teachers in International Schools podcast. Listen to other episodes by visiting mtiis.com or learn more about our community on Facebook by simply searching for Music Teachers in International Schools. If you know someone who you think I should get on the podcast, I'd love to hear from you. You can find me at chriskoelma.com, ChrisKoelma.com. See you next time.